Good afternoon, and welcome to our session on leveraging Kuali Research in a time of COVID. I'm Rob Loudon. I'm the Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Indiana University, and it's my pleasure and opportunity to share the IU story of Kuali Research in a time of COVID. I'm going to share a little bit of background around what the last year for us has looked like and how Kuali Research has played such a critical role in our success here at Indiana University. I'm going to start with some challenges and some of the adaptations. So it's probably pretty difficult for you all to think and remember what life was like back in that magical year called 2019. You might recall that we actually had full in-person lecture halls. We had bustling and busy research labs. We had students learning in clinical settings and even crowded in-person ceremonies and events. And dare I say, maybe on an occasion, somebody went to a sporting event and was allowed to sit in a crowd. So I know that's probably fuzzy in everyone's head as you're staring into the screen, but remember, that's what 2019 actually looked like. But then March of 2020 hit like a sledgehammer, and our classrooms closed down, our labs, our campuses, and our stadiums all went empty. And that was a somber reality for all of us. So what did that look like at IU? I want to take a little bit closer look at what that timeline actually played out for us like at Indiana University. So on March 23rd, campus research was limited to essential research activities only. All of our other on-campus research was paused and put into hibernation. On April 30th, our President Michael McRobbie, announced the formation of a laboratory research restart committee to begin evaluating what research in labs might actually start to look like. Also, the President approved an exemption to the university-wide hiring freeze that had been implemented to allow for hires or reappointments that were funded entirely by external grants. On June 1st of 2020, non-essential research that needed to be conducted on campus was allowed to resume. It required pending the approval of a return to campus research application form, and then one could move forward in that regard. Research that could be conducted off campus was still required to do so. And for those of you at different universities and institutions, these timelines might parallel what you also experienced. As we prepared for our campuses to reopen in fall for classes and what mostly was a somewhat normal start to our fall semester in 2020, on August 18th, our Restart Committee released guidelines for undergraduates to participate in on-campus research. And as of today, that is still where we're at Indiana University. Research that can be conducted remotely should and does continue to do so, but we have policies and procedures in place to support the ongoing on-campus research. So that's kind of the 80,000-foot high-level look at what our timeline looked like here at Indiana University. Looking back to March 2020, let's take a look at some of the specific ways IU was able to adapt to the new research environment. Right away, while non-essential research activities were paused, researchers quickly pivoted, and they pivoted incredibly well. They pivoted to writing and submitting grant proposals, literally at a record-setting pace, beginning in March and continuing throughout the entire year. So here is a small indication of what that looked like and how that played out for us. You can see proposals submitted in 2020 accelerated beyond what had been done in previous years, especially in that March-April timeframe. And not shocking. It's amazing when you trap someone in their home and they can't do what they have been doing for years and years previously, but they know how to write grant proposals, how they focus on doing so and have great success with that. So when you submit record amounts of proposals, hopefully the outcome is the award dollars will follow. And again, you can see from IU's analysis over a multi-year period, the acceleration began in late in fiscal year 2020. Our momentum continued well into fiscal year 2021 when we saw our proposal success rate climb from about 17%, from 47 to 64%. So those faculty members, those researchers, having the time to focus on those proposals really paid off. We also saw the success rate by dollar amount increase from 29.1% to 39.3%. On the surface, that might not seem like much, but that's actually an impressive 10% increase over the average for us for the past 5 years. So during our pause, our faculty stepped up in ways that were, quite frankly, impressive. They submitted more grants, and in turn, they won more awards than they ever had in the past. And while much of this was funding related to COVID, we saw a lot of success across disciplines and schools for proposals unrelated to COVID as well. And I think that's incredibly important. It is often misrepresented that this was all due to new COVID research grants. So while certainly a testament to the talent and dedication of our research community, this quick pivot to writing and submitting proposals, while much of research was paused, would not have been possible if our Office of Research Administration had not been able to also adapt quickly to the new working conditions that they were forced into and to keep pace with the volume of submissions that was setting records. Our use of Kuali Research and, quite frankly, our IT capabilities were key factors in our success as we made this pivot and transition. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time to show you just a few examples of and some features of Kuali Research, which we were able to leverage to make the sudden transition a success, and really were an instrumental piece with the folks working through this during this transition period. So one of the things that we used right out of the gate was the dynamic question framework. It enabled us to quickly add a new field to proposals to track and report on COVID-19 research. And as those of you that are familiar with the product know, we were able to do that without any coding at all. And here you can see the reports we were able to quickly spin up since we had this new field. So we could quickly identify which of the proposals were related to COVID. Kuali Research's flexible roles and permissions framework allowed us to grant read-only access to our communications office. So they could find and review information about noteworthy research without having to go through research administration staff. So it just gave them an immediate way to get in, to access that information without disrupting our research administration staff that were dealing with this substantial and record-setting amount of applications, proposals, and grants. So you can imagine this saved time for the administrators, allowing them to focus on the work of managing the increase of volume of the proposals that they were seeing come in. There were also some system features which we already had in place prior to COVID to support partial remote work by research administration staff that were greatly valuable in allowing a quick transition to an all remote work environment. One of those is electronic routing, shown here. Of course, it allowed us to quickly and efficiently complete all the proposal review and approval steps within the system. Here, we can see the system's watermarking feature has been applied, has applied a stamped approval to this informed consent statement. So at IU, institutional review boards stamp the final copy of the consent document with approval date prior to distribution to study subjects. So with the watermarking feature, staff did not have to physically print out that proposal, stamp it, scan it back in, the approved consent document. And many of these staff, as you can all appreciate, probably weren't prepared for setting up a home office to have all of those devices and facilities in place to support such a process. Another very valuable feature was our automated correspondence with electronic signatures. In the IRB protocols module, the system generates and sends correspondence to study personnel when approvals and other important events in the protocol review process occur. So most importantly for remote staff, Kuali Research could store signatures and apply them to generated correspondence through configuration, rather than someone having to, again, print, physically sign, scan back in, and complete that process. Again, the feature not only saved us time, but it also helped us support remote work, since again, some staff did not have immediately the necessary equipment on hand in their homes. This helped us when we were unable to backfill vacancies, which at IU in March, we went to a hiring freeze and an inability to fill vacancies. It was at a time when we were submitting more proposals than ever. So, we stopped hiring, we couldn't backfill positions, and we're increasing the workload, which I know everyone loves that type of sequence. But these helped us track COVID research, helped us to adjust to a completely remote work environment for research administration staff as well. So in addition to the features in Kuali Research, as I mentioned, our IT organization came together in a most supportive way and was able to really step up with other initiatives to advance the volume of research, unprecedented volume of research that we were experiencing. So we very quickly developed a web form to approve essential research exceptions, this new administrative process that had been thrust upon us. We also created a web form for reviewing and approving return to campus for non-essential research after June 1, as I mentioned in the timeline slide. And additionally, we were also able to leverage the REDCap e-consent framework to collect informed consent electronically for non-FDA human subjects research. So amidst the backdrop of a pandemic and a quick pivot to remote work in 2020, we implemented the protocols module because, when you've got unprecedented volumes of work, you're all remote and you have every other complication in life going on, it's a perfect time to begin implementing a new module. And so we began. So as we begin that exercise in February, in the midst of that record volume, several key features were not yet developed as part of that particular module. And so prior to us kicking off the project, we had to assess what that meant and how we would tackle that. One of the first things that we looked at was, a play from a previous playbook, and that was an option that we knew well. That is funding additionally to accelerate feature development. We'd used it in the past with the conflict of interest and commitment implementation, and we assessed, could we just throw some money at this to, bridge these gaps such that this project and timeline would make sense. But in this case, we really determined that this was not a great option. And in large part, it was due to the uncertainty that we all experienced in 2020 when the pandemic hit. Fiscally, there was a wealth of uncertainty as the world pivoted and transitioned amidst this pandemic backdrop. But one thing that we did determined very quickly on was we knew we had great strength in the IU development team, and we have incredible partners with the Kuali technical team. And so we provided the code and contributed the features that we felt were going to be critical to our success of the deployment of that particular, of the protocols module. Additionally, being the strong partner that they are, Kuali also aligned some of the features on their roadmap to parallel our go live. So they really helped strategically position their assets and our assets in such a way that created a win-win for both IU and Kuali, and really by proxy, any of the community and members that leverage the protocols module. So IU was able to get critical features and meet its target date, which we did, and Kuali got the features that helped improve the product. IU developed several features as part of our partnership with Kuali, and there are a couple in particular we wanted to highlight here, and we won't go through the gory details. You can read the list here as I go through this, but I'd just like to highlight a couple of these because I think they'll really resonate with you and your research administration folks. So when we kicked off this project in early 2020, the Kuali protocols, as many of you likely know, could only support one active protocol amendment or renewal at a time. So if you've ever seen an IRB protocol, you know it's a very complex document that captures a breadth of information about the project. So after the initial approval of the study protocol, even minor changes, such as changes to personnel, require an amendment to be submitted and reviewed. So with single amendments or renewals only, you could easily have a situation where a pending amendment under review was holding up approval of a separate change. With multiple pending amendments, researchers can submit these in parallel so that more involved changes, like changes to study procedures, aren't holding up more straightforward changes, like adding or removing study personnel. This turned out to be a very complex feature to code, touching many parts of the system, from the user interface to the back-end logic to handle merging of approved changes into the main protocol, as well as into other active amendments or renewals, while ensuring all the time parallel amendments did not overwrite each other. Needless to say, they didn't call me to help write that code. I think they should have, but they didn't. But that we were able to collaborate and deliver this feature on time really speaks to me, and I think to us, to the strength of the partnership. Another feature we're very pleased with is the ability to retrieve personal training data from a remote source. So we created a gadget in the Kuali Form Builder, which can query a remote API to retrieve training data and display it right on the personnel screen. In our case, we are pointing the gadget at a local API we built to return all the training data which we store in our systems locally at IU. You can imagine this saves a lot of time for screeners in the Office of Research Compliance, as they are able to quickly verify all of the personnel are compliant with the training requirements inside the application on the protocol screen itself, rather than having to go back and forth to our local system for each person and manually check all of their training records. While IU has contributed some minor enhancements and bug fixes to the product before, I would say the extent of this development partnership was pretty unprecedented and required, quite frankly, a leap of faith from both sides, IU and Kuali. IU developers were tightly embedded with the Kuali team and adhered closely to their development standards and processes. Both teams were practitioners of Agile and used tools like Jira for managing work, which helped us ramp up quickly and make sure we were staying on task and on track with our collective timelines. And of course, no collaboration these days, and especially in 2020, would be complete without plenty of Zoom meetings and Zoom fatigue. And so we had plenty of that. But members of IU and Kuali's development teams met regularly to review the progress, discuss new tasks, and answer the multitude of technical questions that always come up in a massive development effort like this. So the implementation has been quite successful here at IU. While there have been a few bugs identified and issues to address, overall, the rollout has been smooth, and Kuali Protocols has gotten positive feedback that it saves our researchers time at a time when they most desperately needed more time. We've also received positive feedback about the improved user experience. As you can see, the new interface is much cleaner and more intuitive. Additionally, the new system is faster and more accessible and features a powerful form builder and progressive disclosure framework, so we can easily customize our form for our business needs, and researchers only see form sections and fields which are relevant to their particular projects. The speed and configurability deliver noteworthy time savings, both for researchers completing the form and compliance office personnel reviewing the submissions. So as of February 16th, 2021, only 28 days after our go-live date, we had 1,124 total submissions. Of those, 720 were processed and 404 were in progress. Overall, we have been able to transition to the new system pretty seamlessly without slowing down the pace of processing these submissions. And overall, we've been able to keep pace with our record-setting number of proposals. And we quite frankly hope this continues for many years to come. So what are the lessons that we've learned over this last year? Pandemic, massive increases in research, new protocols implemented. What did we take away from that? Well, the quick pivot to grant writing while research activities were paused clearly paid off. It's amazing when you lock some folks up, give them time to focus on these things, they can pump out incredible volumes and quality, and clearly is something that I'm confident our research community is taking note of. We won't always lock them up to accomplish that, but I think we definitely learned that when they're given a bit more time, they can apply that very effectively. The other thing that I would say we learned was that the pivot would not have been possible if the Research Administration Office was slowed by adapting to remote work. A well-managed contribution process can be a force multiplier. There are lots of schools out there with talent. This is how the community of quality came to be. And we are very proud to be a contributor to and a recipient of these features. This is a unique aspect of the Kuali ecosystem. You all know most vendors would not have done this for us. You can name any of those that have hundreds of millions of dollars in capital reserves, and no matter who I might have called to ask them for this type of partnership, likely I would have gotten crickets as a response. So we appreciate that Kuali stepped up with us and made it work. Also, IU was very fortunate in another way that others might not be as well aware. In 2018, and I know that seems like a million years ago, but it wasn't that long ago, our IT organization ran an emergency management exercise. And coincidentally, that exercise was focused on a global pandemic. So we went through a formal emergency management exercise of what the IT response to a global pandemic would be. And we had that training and experience in our pocket when 2020 hit. As you can imagine, we learned much in that process and applied it before it was needed in many cases. Investments in preparation for an event like a global pandemic prior to COVID paid off and allowed us to adapt quickly. This was evidenced by our ability to implement an entirely new module in a predominantly remote work situation. Teams were able to remain productive in an all remote situation. As you all are likely aware, there is a sizable national discussion about what remote work will look like. This experience will help us figure out how to maintain and accelerate productivity and keep IU a desirable employer, recruiting top IT and research talent. I want to pause now and thank you all for your time this afternoon. And I have two colleagues that will be joining me, and we are happy to take your questions and continue the dialogue. And it's hard to hear you over the 1,000 people in the room cheering and clapping right now. So just pause for a second before you ask that first question.
Rob, thank you so much. I do have one question, and it might vary based on business unit, but to what extent do you think the transition to remote will become the future way that folks work in research administration at IU? Hybrid, fully remote, back to in-office?
I think it's a great question. You know, there was a article put out by Salesforce in the last week or two, and I think the title of it was something to the effect of "The 9 to 5 workday is dead," which clearly catches folks' attention. But in that they talked about, and I think a lot of IT organizations, and especially IT organizations that support research, can appreciate their stance on what they determined was going to be their new norm. And I'll summarize pretty substantially, but in short, Salesforce is an organization that had people working remote exclusively. Many of their employees were already doing that pre-COVID. They also had and continue to have employees that exclusively work in person in their corporate facilities. And they talked in detail about, we're not abandoning our corporate facilities. We still see great value and need in those. But it was kind of that group in between that they really had some interesting points and takeaways on. And that was that they fully anticipated, and in fact, we're going to implement a process where the majority then of that remaining workforce would have a combination, a hybrid, I think is a term that we're probably getting as sick of as hearing about cloud. But this hybrid group that would strategically focus time in office, whether that was 3 or 4 days a week, on in-person collaborations, client interactions, presentations, those interactions that we have regularly that benefit from the high fidelity of being in person. And so, I think oftentimes IT and administration get put into that bucket of, well, they did this for a year and they can do this. And I think my opinion is that there will be some combination of all three of those things, and it makes sense. I think there's times when the in-person experience benefits greatly and the efficiency of that is seen. But you can't not look at our data and say, when researchers are given a couple weeks of uninterrupted time to simply write proposals, look at the results. And so I think a combination of that plays into many of our futures moving forward.
Yeah, and just to speak to the Office of Research Administration here at IU specifically, I believe even prior to COVID, they had been starting to move towards a more of a hybrid work environment where, staff could work up to 2 days from home if they chose. And, some of the features that, that Rob highlighted in Kuali Research that had already been put in place to support that, really helped them pivot to the full remote. But, given the success that they had, during the past year, I certainly would expect that hybrid, at least that hybrid experiment to continue and maybe shift a little bit more in the remote direction. But but that's to be seen.
Other questions?
Another
This might
question
be an
from
example
Casey.
of one. Oh, go ahead.
Given that you were implementing the protocols module during the pandemic, how did you approach training for users?
That's
a great question. I don't have the answer to that, Jeff.
Yeah, so I think, we definitely still put an emphasis on training in the new module. It was obviously in the past we would have, more like a classroom setting where people would come in person and go through the training. In this case, that was largely not feasible. So, it was largely the same kind of structure and emphasis on training, but using tools like Zoom and then there were obviously lots of materials put out there for people to review and lots of newsletters, all the typical things. But I would say the main difference was just simply kind of like everything else. Instead of having in-person meeting, in-person classes, we had remote trainings.
I see another question popping up, or is that a thank you? Maybe this is a great example of where in-person might facilitate more spontaneity in questions.
I have a question.
There's one. Oh, I recognize this individual.
What's up,
yes,
Rob?
Sir.
So this is a little more personal. So you took on a new role just as the world exploded. And I'm just interested if you have any insights into what was that like for you personally, and if you have any professional advice going. This is a huge role, and it's awesome. What got you here? What are some of the principles that you feel are important as an executive?
So you were breaking up. That sounded like a really complicated question. I didn't get all of it. So maybe no. So Joel, it's a great question. My first advice is, don't take on a substantial new role in the midst of a pandemic and the backdrop for an organization that's never been through a pandemic where anyone has a playbook or memory of how did 100+ years ago we get through the last pandemic. A theme that I've shared with our colleagues here regularly is it's our moment to really demonstrate the decades of preparation. Not just 2 years ago did we do a pandemic exercise, but as an IT organization, leading nationally in our abilities, here's our chance. It's when our faculty and our researchers needed us the most. Here at Indiana University, we pivoted 8,000+ faculty members to all online in that second to third week of March, many of whom had never done an online course before. And now they were thrust into the technology. I came in July, and so then the next phase of that was, well, how are we going to start in person with a pandemic in the backdrop? And not surprisingly, and my colleagues in the Big Ten Academic Alliance as well can speak to their experiences there because I've heard their stories. But I would say that universities, especially those in the Big Ten and probably broadly across the nation, leverage their IT organizations in ways that they never did before. And so, I had colleagues like Laura Fox embedded in arrival testing. And this wasn't just for the basic support of the laptops and the Zebra printers and saliva collection and so forth. It was all of the integrations with all of the systems that the institution uses, identifying who's coming in, who's scheduled for their test. When do they get the result? With that result, how do they then check into the dorm or the fraternity or sorority or wherever they might be living on campus? And so, I would say 2020 marked a period in my career where our institution, Indiana University, leveraged IT in ways that I don't think anybody had prepared for specifically. And I would say from our network infrastructure, our ability to rapidly deploy Wi-Fi in parking lots. I mean, who thought that was a thing, right? But it's a great way to isolate. You're in your own vehicle. You don't have broadband in your house because you'd never needed that quite the way you need it in 2020. So you couldn't prepare for that. We could rapidly deploy that. You could come park in one of our parking lots and get on Wi-Fi, and now you've got broadband and you can interact, whether it was from a work, research, or education perspective. You could stay effectively engaged. So, I would say that, that marked a big part of my start. The other thing I would say is never accept a job and let it be announced months before you begin, because it just means you work for free for those months in preparation. But many, many other wise folks know that better than I. So I learned that one the hard way too.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Other questions? Go ahead, please.
Was just thank you. Squeezing in one more. I'm probably taking advantage, asking so many questions, but I'm so glad that the development partnership you referenced felt successful from my use point of view. We were deeply grateful for it. Felt it was very successful as well. You referenced the two development teams working well together because they both, practiced Agile and had other things in common. Maybe this is more of a question for Jeff, but were there other things that made communication work well? I mean, two teams inevitably have two different cultures. Were there any points where that kind of showed itself? How did you resolve those things? And how did you just make sure communication was smooth?
Yeah, so sorry, I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Jeff McGregor. I'm the manager of the Research Administration Systems team here at IU. So, I think for us, it did help. I mean, it did help us already having some relationships with the people on the quality side that we ended up partnering with. So, we had my team had been attending, the user groups for several years, the technical user groups. So a lot of the folks that we ended up working with on that partnership, we'd already gotten to know them. We were comfortable with them. We had a certain level of trust there going into the partnership. So that was very valuable. And I think another one of the challenges, a couple of challenges, going in for us was the new tech stack. Actually, we were familiar with the sponsored programs modules, which are on an enterprise Java stack, but the compliance modules are full stack JavaScript, MongoDB. So it's a different architecture, and we didn't want to be. We wanted to be productive. Like, we knew there was going to be some ramp up needed, but we wanted to be careful not to be a strain on the quality team. So we did do some training beforehand to kind of get ready and prepare ourselves, so that we kind of knew the fundamentals going in. And then, sort of managing expectations around, what are the things that are appropriate for us to go through this avenue, because we did have a pretty direct line of communication to the quality technical team, whereas typically if you have a bug in one of your products or something, you would go through Zendesk, right? Well, there's a temptation there to kind of use those lines of communication in ways that they really kind of aren't supposed to be used. So finding those kind of boundaries was something that we explicitly talked about at the beginning of the project, and that was really valuable. For us, the main things were having some trust and some relationship going in, kind of preparing ourselves and setting expectations around, around what was appropriate for that forum and for that development partnership. We really, quality was very, very receptive to those conversations, and it was really, it wasn't one side dictating what it was, those terms to the other. It was really a conversation, and we ended up in a good place.
Thank you.
I might add to that as well, because I think hopefully it resonated with all of you out there listening now. But collaboration is core to the ethos of higher education. Collaboration often is always viewed as coming with substantial overhead. It's so much easier if Joel and I don't have to discuss this, if Joel just says this is what we're doing, and vice versa. At least that's the perception. I think we demonstrated what higher ed continues to demonstrate decade after decade after decade. Yes, there is some effort involved in collaboration. Yes, it can be faster to go alone, but the long-term gains are substantial. And I think, just some of the examples we shared here, individually, we wouldn't have gotten to the same place as quickly. I think we in Indiana University have brought down that collaboration learning curve a bit. It's a learned skill set, but clearly our colleagues in Kuali embraced it and demonstrated their abilities to jump right in and remove the overhead with collaboration and get to a quicker advanced outcome. This week we're also doing the 3-year anniversary for OmniSoc, and again, it's a collaboration of universities coming together. And I can speak for my colleague Michelle at Rutgers, and her presentation this morning. She talked about we couldn't have afforded to do what we can do collectively together if we did this in isolation. Rutgers simply couldn't have. IU couldn't have. But Rutgers, IU, Purdue, Northwestern, University of Lincoln and Nebraska, coming together collectively, pooling their resources in a way to counter, what we've seen, solar winds and some of the other cybersecurity events of the last year. We're 10 times better off, and we're years ahead of where we would have been if we wouldn't have focused on that collaboration. So to me, it is just core. It is part and parcel to a success working collaboratively in a partnership. Other questions? Is there a text question?
There's a text question from Terry Durkin. Thousands of submissions in the first couple of weeks of new protocols is very impressive. What was the impact of that volume in a new system on your support and operational teams? How is that different from when you were managing the IRB system on campus?
I can speak.
Yeah.
Jeff, you can go specifically into the IRB component, and I can speak generally to the impact of support at IU.
Okay, sure. So for the IRB component, I mean, one reason we had such a big volume is we did, during the cutover period when we were migrating data from the legacy IRB module to the new Kuali Protocols module, we paused submissions for about a week. So there was a backlog of submissions for that week, and then when we went live, those started rolling in. So that, for those of us who have been through big migrations, big system implementations, you're going into that first day and you're just white knuckling it. I mean, as much testing as you can do and as good as you feel about it, you're always afraid something's going to come up. And we did find a few things here and there that we had to work with Kuali to fix, and that's pretty typical. But there were really no major issues. I mean, we were able to push through everything very smoothly. The new system is clear. I mean, Terry, you're familiar with the legacy KCIRB system, which had a lot of great functionality, but the new system is much faster, both for the researchers and for the back office staff. So the volume really, I think that, I mean, from what I've heard from them, that volume, the extra volume, has been easily mitigated by the improved speed of the system and efficiency of the system.
And I would just say, from the overall support impact for us, I think one of the side effects of the pandemic for us from an academic calendar perspective was we ended in our fall semester exclusively in-person options just before the Thanksgiving holiday, and we didn't start again until in the last couple of weeks. So we were in a remote-only status, even for the traditional semesters. Anybody that started the traditional semester was exclusively online for the first month or so. So I think, whether that was strategic planned or not, that helped position us to not have kind of the same beginning semester upheaval that we would see either at the beginning of the fall semester or the beginning of the spring semester. So it just really allowed us to space it out looking at the numbers with our Associate Vice President for Client Services and Support that oversees the support side of things, we saw no discernible increase in volume there. Any final questions? It's been a great success story. Hopefully you got that from the presentation, and we couldn't be happier to be where we're at with protocols and the rest of the product moving forward. But hopefully what we shared resonates with many of you, and might encourage you to take a look at protocols if you're not already planning to move to that, and ensure that returns value to your organization as well. I thank you and have a virtually great day.